What does REPO hide from you off camera and behind the scenes? REPO is a multiplayer horror roguelite where you get to explore randomly generated maps in search of loot. You either brave the horror of these excursions on your own, or recruit some friends to drastically increase the hilarity. Either way, there's money to be made, and it's unfortunately your job to earn it. In this video, we'll be taking a look behind the scenes at some things we're not supposed to see, like this super unusual driving sequence, and a closer look at some inaccessible areas. We'll be messing with some stuff as well, like seeing what would happen if we shrank the beamer, or even left the map entirely. There's lots to see, and even more to break, so I hope you enjoy today's out of bounds look of REPO. Now as usual, I'll hit you with a quick recap of how this game works, that way we're all on the same page. After starting a new save, you and your teammates will head into a randomly selected location where the job can begin. The primary goal is to search these places for the valuable items that are scattered within. You're not alone in this venture, and I'm not referring to your potential teammates either. A ton of different monsters can appear inside these facilities, and they're not too happy to see you stealing all their swag. You'll have to run, hide, and sometimes fight your way through them to extract your haul and press on. After extracting the goods, you'll return to the truck to escape, traveling to the shop where you can purchase stat upgrades and weapons for your survival. Each time an extraction is complete, the next one will be more difficult, and the tax man grows hungrier, requiring a higher amount of extractions and more cash to finish the level. Your team being wiped means game over, and you'll have to start from the very beginning. Recap aside, let's start by checking out this title screen, because there's a lot more to it than you'd first think. From our typical view, we'll watch as the truck drives on a seemingly endless road, passing by several signs and billboards along the way. By moving the camera off to the side though, the illusion will be broken instantly. The truck is animated with spinning wheels and a bouncing appearance to simulate movement, but the background is doing all the work here. There are 4 false mountains that surround the scene, and a dozen more objects besides them to work together to build this environment. The road in the center is a flat asset with an endlessly looping animation which starts off camera, and these images of a tree line intersect where this object starts. The grass and road objects sort of pinch on each end, and this helps create the neat wide-angle lens effect when viewed normally. As for the signs and billboards that pass by during this sequence, they're clearly stuck in some kind of Twilight Zone time warp. These assets will blink into existence a short ways in front of the truck, and once they pass by and left our typical viewing angle, they'll instantly reset to their starting position at the front of the scene. There isn't much else to see here, but before moving on, I decided to be a bit more considerate of others on the road. By shrinking the truck down to the size of an RC car, we take up much less space. Somehow this managed to break the already destroyed truck we occasionally pass by. It also shrank in size, and so did the animation's parameters, meaning it appears and disappears in the wrong place. Oops. Now, as I started up a new single-player game, the first level I arrived in was Swift Broom Academy. Taking a look at this level from an overhead view, we can see not only the layout of this level, but also the extraction tube used to send off our goodies. We can't see where this leads from our typical view, but here we can see that it has no ceiling and extends way out of bounds. We'll be taking another look at this device a bit later on, but for now I wanted to try locating the monsters. Moving the camera to the far side of the map, I found both a peeper and a clown. These enemies, actually labeled Ceiling Eye and Beamer in the game's files, are, temporarily out of service. Because I'm currently in a new save, only level 1 monsters are able to spawn, and they're loaded in at the very furthest point away from me. As you reach higher levels, the behavior and quantity of these enemies will change, making it a lot harder to complete extractions without a couple of casualties. While looking around back here, I caught a glimpse of something underneath the map, and ironically, it's also the map, at least sort of. The green object you're looking at here is the asset used whenever the player pulls up their map. Because the map is randomly generated each time we load in, this object is modular in the same way, meaning it also changes every time a new map is generated. At this time, the unexplored rooms are blocked by a black barrier with a question mark in the center. Each time a new door is opened, these barriers will disappear, and out of bounds you can watch this happen in real time. As the player marker moves in tandem with our model up above, these barriers quickly shrink and disappear. Inside the map, we can take a closer look at how this map overlay functions in game. And as you can see, it basically pops into existence with no traces of where it came from. Something else you'd likely never know existed is the dark barrier that appears behind it. This isn't a trick applied to the player camera, but instead a giant barrier that appears behind the device every time we activate it. Speaking of things we can't see, you may have noticed that even though I'm currently running around the map, the character we play as currently doesn't exist, at least not visibly. During multiplayer sessions, we have hilarious models whose mouth reactions tracks to microphone inputs. But because we're loaded into single player at the moment, no such model is needed. Despite this, I was able to enable the player avatar rig through the game files and bring this character to life. Kind of. When hacking this elegant red creature back into our dimension, the animations we typically see from a third-person perspective aren't showing. That means we're a completely rigid model with one arm sticking out, and our legs don't do much running either. There's a good reason this model is disabled from our usual perspective though, and this is why. In a cruel swing of irony, our vision is being obstructed by our eyeballs of all things. This game is hard enough without our view being obstructed, but this would make it nearly impossible. Before I could explore this area any further, I was sadly obliterated after the beamer fired his laser, which sent me to the disposal area. Here, you're met with a game over, as the floor drops beneath you and you explode in the void. From another perspective, you can see that this location is really a massive arena where you're meant to fight for your life. This whole event takes place within this giant pillar-shaped set of platforms, and I didn't expect it to look like this when viewing it for the first time. There are a bunch of objects up here that you're supposed to use against other players, but because we're running it solo, the floor instantly breaks beneath us and all the objects break away in the void space. It's definitely cool seeing it from another perspective though. Because I've died at this point, I'll have to start over from the beginning, where we can re-enter Swift Broom Academy for another look at this area. As I said earlier, the maps in this game are randomly generated each time you enter them, and this is a lot more clear when viewing the area from Out of Bounds. The entire layout has changed, and if we look at the map subsection Out of Bounds, we'll see that this has changed too. You'll basically never get the same map twice, which makes each run completely unique. On the other side of this map, I found there were a handful of gnomes hanging out in this hallway. These enemies are usually pretty easy to deal with, and since they are so small, you can literally pick them up and break them to pieces. But what if that weren't the case? Well, as you can see, I made this monster grow, creating a nightmare-inducing mega gnome. A moment later, he shrunk himself down and vanished from my sight, but he must have appeared elsewhere in the map because I ran to him a bit later on, and he was totally massive. Bigger size doesn't mean more health though, and I accidentally broke him as I walked into the stairwell. Oops. Once again, depending on which level you're currently on, the enemies in this game can respawn a set time after the player kills them, and a short while after killing him, I ran into this very same gnome again. Interestingly enough, he was still giant, and this is because our enemies aren't fully deleted after being killed, but instead their death animations play before being temporarily disabled. That means the changes made to the model are still active, and Shmebulak Prime will live on forever. I also noticed here that he had trouble hitting me, so I picked him up and sent him to a porcelain grave. With the gnomes properly dispatched, I went and grabbed some loot. So now we can have a look at this item extraction process from another perspective. The sirens start going off after the cart is pushed into the station, and the tube drops down around it violently. I was inside the tube by mistake while this took place, and so I exploded as the items disappeared and the walls opened up once more. Somehow I lived through my death though, only to die to a gnome seconds later. Before leaving this map again, I ran into a beamer in this dungeon area while exploring. Instead of getting blasted away like last time, I decided to make them less menacing by shrinking them down to the size of a gnome. This did not help at all. Their laser is still massive, and it will destroy everything in its path, even though the monster is now tiny. The only difference now is that they aim the laser upwards, since the player is technically above them in the map. I basically gained nothing by shrinking this monster, and it was just as chaotic as ever. Something else you'll find cool, hopefully, is what this attack looks like in bullet time. The effects are a lot easier to see, with the beam itself stretching out to the walls, and sparks flying off of anything it hits. The player is not as lucky in this case though, and as soon as the laser hits me, I explode, and the pieces of my body rain down like shards of broken dreams. So after extracting all the needed loot, you'll ship off to the service station where you'll be able to snag some goodies. These can be weapons like mines or bear traps, or health and stamina upgrades. If we take a look at this area from Out of Bounds, it's a lot bigger than I imagined. This store sits on top of a giant platform with some grass and a huge parking lot. The truck is smashed into the side of the store, and beside it are a couple of broken down cars. What I find most interesting here are the 3 rings of trees surrounding the entire level. Similar to the driving sequence, these are flat images placed here at varying distances to create the illusion of a dense forest. Something else that would be easy to miss is this attic area above the store. We can access this by using an openable tile on the ceiling. And up here is an employee that apparently used to work here. They're named Skeleton Worker 01 in the game files, but they clearly won't be getting much work done now. After leaving the shop, we'll end up in transit to the next location. And outside the truck is a pretty familiar sight. During this traveling scene, we're in a nearly identical copy of the title screen map. The same visual assets are used in this area, the main difference being that the truck is now fully fleshed out inside. After re-entering the map again, the first enemy I encountered was this discount Slenderman. The Shadow Child is a lanky, tall monster with a rigid, baby-like face. Typically, this monster will jump scare you for looking at it, and in bullet time we can watch a lot more clearly as these ghostly hands grow outward from its back. It's seriously freaky looking. After a bit, their face will mutate while the jump scare occurs, and a separate set of hands snap to the player to deal damage while the ones on their back disappear. This instantly killed me, and the Shadow Child vanished at the exact same time. I was tired of getting my butt kicked by every monster that crossed my path, so I decided to make it a bit harder for them. I achieved this by cutting out a section of the floor and moving it off to the side, creating a floating platform on which I could escape. I then went to find an enemy, in this case No Face, the robe. They chased me onto the platform, but somehow crossed the gap without issue, forcing me onto the emergency backup platform I put here just in case. The robe immediately turned around and left, leaving the room and forgetting I existed while wandering as usual. On the topic of terrifying eldritch horrors, I couldn't possibly forego mentioning the most voracious and bloodthirsty creature in this entire game, this cute little rubber ducky. No, I am not joking. This little fellow is called the apex predator, and regardless of their appearance, the name is well earned because they hide a nightmarish secret. They'll constantly jump in your face and obstruct your view, essentially baiting you into grabbing them, because interacting with this creature results in a terrifying transformation. When this happens, their little duck bill opens up, and the jaws of an eldritch monstrosity appear from inside, as their skin and face peel backwards. With the transformation complete, they'll fly through the air, snapping their teeth open and closed as they search for the player. After a while, the jaw will shrink back into their head, their eyes shooting forward as they revert to the cute little ducky once more. Unfortunately, we'll never unsee what lurks beneath the surface. Another monster I encountered during my adventures was this handsome fella, the Spewer. They'll basically just float around the area, and as their name so vaguely suggests, they'll spew acid at anyone in their path. It gets worse than that too, since they're also capable of hopping in your mouth like a set of biohazardous dentures. Because we don't have an active model, the only thing visible as this occurs is the teeth and gums of the creature, and re-enabling the character model doesn't fix this either. At this point I decided it was time to start messing with the objects within the map. One of the first objects I stumbled across was this big, heavy television. I don't currently have any of the strength upgrades, so I can barely pick this thing up off the ground. I wasn't leaving without my cartoons though, so I tried shrinking it down in hopes of lightening the load. Sadly, it's not that easy. And despite looking more like a Game Boy now, it's no lighter than it was before. As you probably guessed, the weight of these objects is not directly tied to their mass, but instead a modifier is applied to each of them that affects how our strength stat is impacted when trying to move it. Because of this, I was able to effectively lighten the object and now it weighed more accurately to its size. Of course, the reverse is also true, so I returned it back to its original size and it was still as light as a feather. I was able to throw it across the room and break it, which I probably shouldn't have done. I'm in this business to make a few bucks though, so I couldn't just break my profit and move on. And after locating a new TV, I decided to haggle them on the price a bit. I must have rolled a nat 20 in persuasion here because the price really went up by about $10 million. With my new multi-million-dollar TV in tow, I headed for the extraction site and it quickly counted up and accepted it. I wasn't expecting the game to allow this, and after the extraction, I made out like a bandit with $8.4 million in profit. This also revealed a bit how the game calculates item damage, since my TV went down nearly $1 million in value from a gentle bonk. It seems the damage is based on the velocity of the impact, and a percentage of the overall price is deducted based on these parameters. What a tragic way to lose $1 million bucks. And with my new haul, I was able to buy as much as I wanted from the store. There was nothing here that I couldn't afford, including the sledgehammer. And with this mighty weapon now in our hands, I wanted to mess with it a bit too. After loading into the level, I started experimenting with some of the hammer's coding, primarily how much damage it can deal, which resulted in a weapon of Omega Boom Boom. Whosoever holds this sledgehammer, if he be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor. This weapon now had nearly 10 times the power it did before, and there was no enemy that could stand in my way. The Shadow Child already has low health, so killing this enemy was an absolute breeze. At one point, the hammer began shaking violently while I was carrying it, and I assumed it was hungry for more combat. So I located the hunter that attacked me earlier, and once again made light work of them. There is no enemy or object that can handle the power of this budget Mjolnir. Mjolnir? How is this thing actually pronounced? Oh wait, I remember. It's pronounced glorious. Messing with the sledgehammer gave me an idea though. Just how powerful can we make the shotgun? This weapon is super strong to start with, and as far as video game shotguns go, it's pretty much the standard issue. Honestly, its biggest weakness is a lack of ammunition and slow firing speed, so I quickly rectified those issues. I gave it infinite ammunition and removed the delay between firing, which made pretty quick work of the bangers that appeared shortly after. That wasn't enough though. I wanted to see just how far I could push this weapon's limits. At this point, I increased the amount of bullets the gun could fire, meaning the bullet spread went from 6 projectiles to a whopping 150. There were so many projectiles that my game would stutter each time it was fired. Rip and tear is an understatement with this thing, and any enemy in my way was as good as toast. All good things must come to an end though, and it went off while I was swinging it around, killing me instantly. Now when the game was packaged for release, the developers left something behind that we were definitely not meant to access. Within the game files, I found a handful of debug options that I assume were used during the game's development, and while I wasn't able to make them all function, the ones that did work were pretty interesting. First, there's an option named Debug Axle, and when activated, I was able to trigger a hotkey to spawn in bags of money. Each of these bags were worth $900, and there's no limit to how many I could spawn. These bags counted as loot for the extraction too, so I could keep flooding the area with money until the job was complete. It's no $10 million TV, but it's still easy money. Next on the list is Debug Robin, which has a similar function as the first, but not quite the same. Once again, I could summon money using a hotkey, this time being a much larger bag worth $1,000 each instead of $900. Weirdly enough, it didn't appear near the player this time, but instead a predetermined location in the map, which resulted in the bag clipping through the floor and freaking out. That's not all, since I was now able to reduce my health by 10 at the press of a button. Don't worry about my well-being though, because there's conveniently an option to heal myself by the same amount. Finally, there is Debug Janik, and this is by far the craziest one of them all. When this option is enabled, you go full-on Akira mode, and you can now use your telekinetic powers to instantly destroy doors that stand in your way. You don't even have to be near them, and still, your powers can break them with ease. As it turns out, our newly acquired powers don't only work on doors as I first thought. To my understanding, there is a set distance surrounding the player where damage is being applied to certain types of objects. I can destroy doors, but I cannot break loot. I can, however, use it on the monsters. These gnomes didn't stand a chance, and they all exploded instantly. But I want to see how strong it was on bigger enemies. It was strong enough that the apex predator was killed in just 3 hits, blowing up into a rain of small feathers. I was nearly unstoppable, or I thought it was until I met a vengeful trudge, who pulled me in and destroyed me in a single swing of their mace. I guess this makes us even for the whole shotgun thing earlier. But with that, we've reached the end of today's behind the scenes look at R.E.P.O. This game is still in active development, so let me know if you want to see more of this game in the future. Cheers!